Yeah, they'll do it. Hit the thing. What? Thanks for the help. Thanks, Mum. Ready to go? Yep. The virtual work session of the Annapolis City Council for Tuesday, June 15th, 2021 will be called to order at 3 p.m. At this time, would everyone willing and able please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Violation. What? Violation.
Please present the first item on the agenda.
The first item on the agenda is ID 14021, Maritime Task Force.
All right, exciting to have you guys here.
Good afternoon. Well, that's loud. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sally Nash, Department of Planning and Zoning. I want to thank you so much for giving us the opportunity today to present the work that this task force has been doing over the last few months. I'm joined by many talented people who have given us a lot of their time to get to this point. And I'm really excited as we're, as you know, working on the comprehensive plan, updating it. This is an integral part of that because our maritime zones are such an important part of our city. So we've been looking at this comprehensively, and we're going to go through our recommendations to date, and we want to hear your feedback. So I'm going to turn this over to Eileen to go for it.
We are delighted to be here. No, that's what. There you go. We are delighted to be here. It's been 6 months, and this task force, which is made up of 34 participants, has been working together, meeting together, and they have forged a consensus. Today, you're going to hear about their progress, their recommendations, and of course, the main goal is to hear from you. This afternoon, you will be hearing from Mike Tomasini. Vic Pasco may or may not come in on Skype. We're not sure how that's going to work. Pete McDevitt, Bob Javen. We'll be hearing from Wendy Sullivan from the Park Service, Susan Zellers, and Will Scott, and Cardi Templeton is back there somewhere. So we would just ask that I have instructed all of them that they have no more than 2 minutes each. So they will be brief. We ask that you let them finish so you hear all their recommendations, and then we know we're going to have a lively discussion with the council. So with that said, Sally made the point, this has been 34 years since there's been any action taken on the maritime districts, and a lot has evolved. The purpose of this task force was to bring forward a cohesive strategy for the future of the industries, because we're looking for the next several years, even though we are structuring it so that the council can relook this in 2 to 5 years as soon as you have enough information. What we have said to the task force is you have to develop a consensus. That is the only basis for a successful strategy that can weather the test of time. So everything you're going to hear from them are recommendations and ideas upon which they absolutely have consensus. They based their approach on the existing districts and decided very early on to keep the 4 distinct districts. It was their feeling that the districts are distinct and they complement each other, and they did not want to change any of, to combine any of the districts. The other foundation of the existing zoning and the proposed recommendations for the maritime districts are the triggers. You'll hear that term several times this afternoon. And what the triggers are, if you think about other jurisdictions, a lot of them have community benefits where if you provide certain things, you get certain things in return. The triggers are an offer of very limited non-maritime use, assuming that that non-maritime use can get a higher rent to offset and maintain the critical and essential working maritime. The triggers are 30-ton boat lift, 20,000 square feet working yard, 25,000 square feet on-land boat storage. So they're very significant, and the task force, with all their deliberations, decided to keep these significant triggers and only add fuel docks as one additional trigger. And again, their reasoning was they want to keep as triggers, because without the trigger, you do not get either the non-maritime or the restaurant use. They wanted to keep uses that can serve as a hub, that we're subsidizing, if you will, or underwriting uses that serve as a hub for all of the other maritime activities to thrive. So that's the strategy that they have built upon. So you have a coalition here, and the coalition there were a lot of stakeholders and a lot of varying perspectives. And what the coalition came to is that they should be able, and they did, respect and make recommendations to support each of the stakeholders, but in a way that benefits everyone. They really worked at not having winners and losers. Their philosophy throughout this approach, really their strength, not their philosophy, their strength comes from the fact that they had a wide range of experts. You had financial experts, 3 economic development experts, environmentalists, several hundred years of boating expertise. With all this expertise, they really were able to craft an amazing approach to move forward for a positive future for the industry, to address the immediate urgent needs, and to make sure that water access would absolutely be incentivized, which is one of the newer aspects of this whole strategy that the city will be building on. So how did we get here since the end of November, 6 months? This group had 21 work sessions and community meetings that included task force meetings, planning commission meetings. This is our second with you, the council, working team meetings, civic organizations, community organizations, water access groups, industry groups. So bringing all of that here together, we're going to start with first the residents' perspective, followed by the industry perspective, well, the residents' perspective, followed by water access strategy, followed by the industry, and then followed by the property owners. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn this over to Mike and Pete.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter McDevitt, and I am a resident of Ward 1, live on King George Street, and certainly a pleasure to be here and see you all in person. As the slide says, 34 years, time to update. So last time they updated this, I was a midshipman here at the Naval Academy. You can see how old I am, and so you can see how long ago that was. It's time for a change, I believe. The focus is on the working yards. They offer openness, views through the water, to the water and the public. They're compatible with sea level rise. They are the critical mass that helps keep that fishing going for the industry of the working maritime activity. As a resident with this group, the consensus is we don't support any more residential uses for the land. available or hotels or redevelopment of the waterfront. Change is happening out there already. I use the waterfront extensively. I have a 30-foot sailboat. I keep it at Annapolis City Marina. I'm on the water 40 to 50 times a season, which my wife thinks is probably 30 to 40 times too much. And I see the change out there since I was a midshipman into now. And the water is very busy out there with all kinds of creative ideas. So change is happening, and it's happening starting yesterday. Recommended positions we look at for the WMM, having a maximum of 50% non-maritime, only on sites with significant triggers, which you will see later on regarding travel lifts, things such as that nature. Supporting restaurants on larger work sites in the WMI, but not to support larger size for restaurants in the WME, which is largely a residential and a footprint issue as well. The need for larger restaurants is recognized because that part of the maritime industry is changing. More pleasure boats out there, more people seeking a place to go from the land and from the water. And so we want to take advantage of that opportunity. And yet create an opportunity, space and possibility, maybe someday for a renaissance in boat building or what have you, but who knows. But to lose that land now for other things would be detrimental. To revisit this maritime strategy in 2 to 5 years, vice 34 years, and look for the opportunity to incentivize water access. Yes, yeah, thank you very much.
Next slide.
Was there another slide? Sure.
I'm going to turn this to,
Do you want to do Wendy first?
Yeah, let's go to Wendy.
Good afternoon. I'm Wendy O'Sullivan. I'm the superintendent of the National Park Service Chesapeake office. We have been based here in Annapolis for more than 20 years, and I have been part of the subgroup that's been focused on public access to the water. And it really was a remarkable team that got pulled together with, and we went through the process to talk about what's existing, what the opportunities are, how to have a purposeful focus on equitable access and looking at gaps. Mike's going to walk through in detail some of our recommendations, but I just want to look at this map and just share that the National Park Service is committed to being a partner with the city to address and look at a strategic approach to public access, to public water access. And we recently had a meeting with an arm of the Department of Transportation. They have a branch that's their innovation branch. It's called the Volpe Center. And as a federal agency, I can partner directly with a sister federal agency and bring in remarkable expertise to help us with a comprehensive plan and approach for both public water access, but even purposefully making sure we're sweeping in the remarkable ideas that are already occurring in the city with intermodal access and other opportunities. So I just wanted to share that little piece that we're excited to continue to build together with the city. And I'll pass it to Mike to share more about our recommendations for public water access.
Thanks, Wendy. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike Tomasini. I own 2 maritime businesses in the city. I am a tenant space in a maritime zone, and I live adjacent to and across the street from several maritime zone properties. So I've got a lot of stake in this game. I was on the group with Wendy and others, comprised of a large group of people with a lot of expertise and a lot of different backgrounds. Many residents from both the Annapolis side of Spot Creek and on Eastport. And a lot of the focus led us to this slide in front of you. We were trying to identify in the early stages, back when it was slushing outside, we were trying to identify ways that we could, number one, inventory what we have. We do have a pretty good network. There are a lot of public properties that are on the water that provide access that might be poorly maintained or might not just be the best thing for one type of water use or another. So we talked in the beginning about how do we inventory that and how do we improve it through this process by involving the property owners that are adjacent to these, by involving the business owners and the National Park Service with funding and, elbow grease efforts to kind of upgrade these things. So a lot of the things that we've talked about are incentivizing water access activities. And what that means is trying to implant businesses and spaces that encourage people to get out on the water. Floating docks for access for paddlecraft, walkways along the waterfront. We wanted to try and come up with a concept for a waterfront promenade, similar to what you have at Susan Campbell Park, where people can walk along the water, and along the way will be given opportunities to get out and experience the water. We wanted to come up with some kind of an incentive for the property owners who are getting flexibility as part of this process to improve the benefits for the community. And the ways that we came up with that are to come up with a tier of incentives that lead to additional flexibility in your non-maritime uses, that started basically with investments into street end parks. How can we make the end of Fifth Street near the city marina paddlecraft launch, as opposed to almost always flooded brick pavement with a trash can that never gets emptied? How do we provide access for people to put a line in the water? Where are those things going to happen? So we talked about $125,000 towards a street end park as something that might be a good benefit to the community. We talked about opening up a community boating facility, something where somebody who lives in the city would be able to store their kayak or canoe and be able to access that with showers and bathrooms and a refreshment area, and where they could do that consistently on a regular basis. And we talked about the possibility of properties that had the ability to provide parking spaces for either employees of the businesses that are in these districts or for residents in a trade-off for flexibility.
Great. Susan?
Thank you. Most of you know me, but for those who don't, I'm Susan Zellers. I'm the Executive Director of the Marine Trades Association of Maryland, located here in Annapolis, a statewide organization, and we operate like a chamber of commerce, if you will, for the marine industry. So most of the boat yards and marinas and that are members of our association, and part of our mission is trying to get people out on the water. Next slide, please. So it's already on the next slide. So why are we supporting this maritime industry?
What company were you from? I'm sorry.
What's that?
You said, what company were you from?
The Marine Trades Association of Maryland, MTAM. So why are we supporting the maritime industry? What's in it for us? Why are we doing this? Well, jobs, number one. There's 3,000 jobs in the industry here in the city. And just to put that in perspective, there's 2,300 at the Naval Academy. And ours pay a lot more taxes than that group does. So we also obviously love the atmosphere, the clanking halyards, the noise that the engines make turning around in the city dock. The whole atmosphere when you look out. We love the lifestyle. We love that we live by the water. No matter how you touch upon the water, whether it's sitting in a restaurant and looking at the water, or whether you're an active boater, or whether you just go put your feet in the water's edge, this is our lifestyle. This is where we are. And lastly, the value. No matter where you are in the city, you're experiencing better property values because of your proximity to the water. Next slide, please. So how do we ensure a strong future for the Annapolis boating businesses, and what all does that mean? Well, for one thing, maintaining this maritime hub that has been created by the zones that were put in place over 30 years ago. This maritime hub, all these boats or all these businesses gathered together are why we have so many boats registered. More boats are registered in Anne Arundel County than in any other county in the state. And it's also why we have so many visitors that come here, because they know they can get soup to nuts. They can get everything done that they need to get done on their boat within this area. So these are where they find the services, the repair, the maintenance, and also where they would store their boats. Triggers must continue, and they're what you would probably want to support the most. These triggers are what makes this industry up. We didn't just choose them randomly. The fact that they have boat storage, the 30,000 or 20,000 square foot of a working yard, 25,000 feet of on-land boat storage, a 30-ton boat lift, or a fuel dock, that is the most of the maritime industry, and that's what keeps it looking like a maritime industry, and that's what we all have decided that we want. So establishing the right flexibility to keep that and to make that happen was part of our task. How do we make sure we maintain this lifestyle we like, and how do we give the flexibility necessary so that we can do that? So if you look at the WMM and the WME and the WMI, we looked at all three of them and said an additional 15% of non-maritime not only keeps us the maritime, but also gives the relief that we need moving forward. Think about this, 11.6 increase in property tax over the last 2 decades, the doubling of construction costs since 1998, building codes that now require ADA, better fire safety measures, and environmental mandates are all at the cost of doing business. And we have to figure out how to compensate that, keep the balance just right, keep the non-maritime as low as we can, but supporting the maritime industry as best we can. Want to go to the next slide, please? So growing and supporting the maritime industry into the future. How do we do that? How do we make that happen? Well, for one thing, we've determined that the city needs to make a commitment to better support the industry by going out and promoting this as a destination, a Mid-Atlantic Center for Maritime Services, promoting that. That means going to events, going to boat shows, reaching out to other businesses that we don't have located here now, and potentially even giving some incentives to bring and locate those folks here. The other piece is workforce training opportunities. So all city residents should know that this is an industry that takes a completely unskilled worker, somebody at the start of their career or somebody who's changing careers, and can help work them into becoming a skilled worker. Our employers recognize that these aren't just out there for the hire. Our employers recognize they have to invest in these people to turn them into skilled workers within the trade. So one thing that's open to everybody. Industry business owners are already a part of something called the Marine Trades Industry Partnership. That's a group that was started by my organization with a grant from Earn Maryland. And what we do is take young people at the start of their careers or older people wanting to be retooled, and we put them into 6-week on-the-job training practicums. This is open to everybody. The applications are online. We're dying for people to apply and be part of this. We want somebody from every ward in the city to be part of that, if we can get you to do that. After the partnership, we often place them. In fact, we're at about 85% retention. So after 6 weeks on the job training, we're holding on to these people and giving them tremendous opportunity for income within the industry. Also, we're inches away from registering an apprenticeship with the state of Maryland. This would be a 2-year marine technician apprenticeship. And the accompanying classroom time would be at the community college. And we expect those classrooms to be starting as early as January of 2022. So there's a lot of opportunity here. I want to reference, some of you were on the tour that we took of Rod's Boatyard and met some of our on-the-job training folks on that day. So if you weren't able to be there, ask Sheila what it was like, who she met, and what those people were like, because we're really making some great headway with bringing young people in and showing them that this is a great option to college. This is a great way to make a living. Another piece for growing and supporting the industry is streamlining the permit process for maritime zones. If you think about coordinating not only permitting and planning, which is tough enough, now add in the Army Corps, and it can be really challenging to push permits through for these folks. And remember, they have only a certain window of time when they're really, really active. So we want to make sure that they're able to get the permits they need in their off season so that they can get the support that they need there. Temporary structures, oftentimes when you see a shrink-wrapped boat, there's somebody working inside in the winter. And sometimes those grow a little bit. We put some structures over top of boats so that they can work all through the winter. And those require permits, but we're asking that those become streamlined in a way that, again, keep our workers working and people employed through the winter months. In-kind bulkhead replacement is another one, making sure that we're in line with the county, with the rest of the state, for how fast we can turn a permit around for bulkhead replacement. We also talked about continuing the exploration of blue technology. The city already has started a lot with that. They've invested in some research and showed that this blue technology dovetails beautifully into some of our spaces here in the city. And finally, this idea of development of a maritime fund. This would be taking that additional 15% non-maritime, the taxes that are generated from that, and using that as a fund to support what we were talking about in the first bullet point, which is promoting Annapolis as a Mid-Atlantic center for maritime services and reaching out to businesses and potentially helping them when it comes to relocating in this area. I think I covered everything.
Great, thank you. Cardi?
Cardi's next with sustaining.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cardi Templeton, and my family and I have owned and managed the property at 2227 where the chart house is since December of 1974. And hard to believe, I've been the family member on the ground for the last 18 years. And this is my hometown, and I am here to tell you that I, along with every other maritime property owner, want the same thing that everyone else on this task force has wanted, which is a thriving maritime industry. I cannot imagine my hometown, our hometown, without boats. And we need to keep them and all of those businesses here. We talk about this as a maritime industry, and I want to take a minute to let you know that it is not as monolithic as it sounds. We have almost all of our maritime businesses in this town today are in support of recreational boating, but they come in several categories. We like to think of them, some of them as hard maritime. Think of those as businesses who have their hands on the boat. So they may be repairing a boat bottom. They may be installing electronics, right? They usually work outdoors. They gotta be by the water because they need to work on the boats that are either in the water or on the hard. They may need a lot of outdoor space for their rigging work. They can usually pay rents in the $12 to $20 a square foot. They like to cluster together at boatyards where they have the assets of a boatyard, like the lifts and the outdoor space, and where they can share customers. I'm not going to dwell too much on hard maritime because we have Rod Jabin here who might know just a little bit about that. On the opposite end is soft maritime, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about that. Soft maritime you could think of as maritime industry folks who have their hands on keyboards or smartphones. Right? They lend to people who want to buy a boat. They insure boats. They may design boats, right? They need to be in office space. I'm going to take a moment here to say, just like the rest of us who are hands-on keyboards kind of workers, we need less office space than we used to. Turns out we can work from our cars or from our homes, right? We, over the last 20 years, but particularly in the last year and a half, have realized that there's a lot of choice to be had, and much of our marketing can happen online and via Zoom. So there's less demand from those folks. They like to be on the water, because isn't it beautiful? Don't we all love to be on the water? But they don't have to be, right? They can run their businesses from places that are not on the water. Now, they can pay $20 to $25 a square foot in rent, which is appropriate for maintaining an office building. But as I said, they don't have to be in boatyards in the same way that hard maritime does. There are also retail businesses in the maritime industry. You could think Faucets, West Marine, Helly Hansen, and many others. There are also some businesses like yacht brokers and small and yacht clubs and sailing schools that have a mixture of different qualities of those three. But I'd love to give you more examples of the soft maritime, because I think that's one of the areas where the maritime property owners are struggling, and as a result, we are all struggling, and the maritime industry doesn't therefore have as much space available to them. I'd love to give you one example. We had a great tenant for 5 years. They were called Just Boat Loans, so you kind of know what they did. And they were growing, and they wanted to add a couple more spaces. We had something for them, and they loved being with us, but they thought about it. And you know what? The owner of Just Boat Loans, you want to guess where he lives? Severna Park. You know where some of his employees live? Arnold. You want to guess where he moved? Ritchie Highway. And his business is doing really well. And he is still lending to boat owners who keep their boats in Annapolis and who repair their boats in Annapolis. He is lending to people who've bought boats in Annapolis. I am so happy he's doing well. But he is one of several examples I could give you of a great long-term soft maritime tenant who made a good business decision, and that happened to not keep them in a maritime zoned property. Just to give you a
You're gonna let him
sense,
finish something.
I have 10 soft maritime tenants. They average 1,200 square feet each. They're not big, usually, okay? From July to March of the last year, think COVID, right? The world was in turmoil. We were all wondering how we were going to make it, right? All of a sudden, I started getting inquiries for little office spaces because people realized maybe I don't need to commute to DC, or maybe I can't continue to work well inside my home with other family members. 33 requests for office space. Take a guess at how many of them were from maritime businesses. 3. Of those 33, 8 became tenants. 1 was maritime, and they took 160 square feet. Now, we haven't changed our marketing. We haven't changed our approach. We haven't changed anything. But that gives you a sense of where the demand is, right? Next slide, please. Here's the problem. They can pay $20 to $25 a square foot, these soft maritime tenants whom I love. Okay? That's enough for me to maintain an office building. But it's not enough for me to renovate an office building when it's no longer to code. Now, why is that? Right? Susan did a lovely job of sharing with you some of the costs that have gone up on our end over the last 34 years. Right? Construction costs have doubled in the last 20 years. None of our faults, it's what's happened, right? ADA has come into place. There have been improvements in code requirements for environmental and fire safety, et cetera. Property taxes have gone up. Now, I'm talking about the rate. I'm not talking about the amount we're paying, because that's based on how much actually we make. Frankly, I would love to pay more in property taxes because it means I've made more money. Right? It's the 11.6% in the rate that is the struggle. Let me give you a real example of how this plays out. Do you guys remember, any of you, we had a fire on Halloween morning of 2016. There were some sirens. It was 5 a.m. Thank goodness nobody got hurt. We were very grateful for the fire department. They came twice that day. The rebuild of that building, which was not a complete start from scratch, right? Because half of it was still there. $1 million. Because of code improvements, code requirements that were different in 2016 than when the building was built, $122,000. So 12% of the construction cost was specifically due to requirements in code that had gone up. Extra insulation, 2 levels of water fountain, right? So that people who are mobility impaired can also get fresh water. In addition, not included in my $122,000, it turns out that we needed to bring our parking lots up to code for ADA. Also got triggered by this fire. $111,000. Property taxes, last year we paid $190,000. I'm not complaining about the 170. Bring it on, because it means that I've got more revenue. 20,000 of the 190, though, was because the property tax rate has needed to go up in the last 20 years. Now, Maritime's having a tough time too. They've got OSHA requirements, right? They've got environmental requirements, they've got staffing issues. So I'm not complaining that Maritime can't pay more. I'm just saying that the two aren't meeting. So let me show you, tell you, give you an example of how this plays out. Eileen wants me to conclude, but this one's really important, and I promise I'm gonna give you some real numbers and we'll get there. I have a building, I call it building number 3. And perhaps I should rename it from a marketing perspective. But I can show it to you and I'd be happy to walk you through it. For 22 years, we had a lovely tenant. They grew, they grew, they grew, they grew. They outgrew. Fair enough. This is what we want to have happen to businesses in town, right? They moved to Park Place in 2008. This is wonderful. 2008, 2009, not great economy. Space went empty. Have to bring it up to code. I hear you. I promise. It's been empty. It's 5,000 square feet. It's been empty since 2008. What would it mean to you all and to the city if it had been full? 5,000 square feet of rentable space for maritime and non-maritime businesses. $25,000 a year in property taxes I would be paying on that building if it were full. 5 businesses, 29 jobs. So ask me, why have I not renovated it? I would like to renovate it. $1.3 million. I got to come up with $350,000. My family and I were willing to do that and take that risk if we can make it work. You know what rent it takes to make it work? $33 a square foot. And it's still going to be cash flow negative for a couple of years. But if I can fill it at $33, it's worth taking the risk. But Maritime can only pay 20 to 25. And so you see the problem. Now, I keep it painted and looking good because I got a lot of buildings around it. But imagine if that were my only building on my property, right? And there are other maritime properties facing that issue. Office buildings aren't viable at maritime rents. If we can have some additional non-maritime, which can often pay more, but critically, there are so many more of them. I can fill spaces, I can underwrite maritime. Have I made my point? Because I think it's time for Rod to speak. Rod, drive it home, baby.
Thanks, Cardi. I think you made your point. So it's a challenge out there, right? I mean, it's a big challenge. This whole idea of the various zones that we have in place, and they're very different. This picture is very powerful, and I want to bring your attention to it. On the right is the Javen Yacht Yard, and you can see that is full of the marine trade groups that Cardi was talking about that need a truck, they need ground floor space, they need flex space, they need warehouse space, they need those kinds of properties. On the left is Annapolis City Marina. What they have is office space, 2-3 floors. If that were expanded, you'll see the switchback stairs that you have to access to get up to the top. That's very challenging for hard maritime groups to get. And so that really, the reason I'm dwelling on that is that I want to make sure that everybody understands the difference between the soft maritime in WMM and the hard maritime, and what it is that we're trying to do here to strengthen the core of the maritime industry in Annapolis. And what we need to be concerned about, what we should really be concerned about, first and foremost, is preserving our brand, our image, which is the triggers that Eileen referred to in her opening statement. The triggers are what you see in front of that Annapolis City Marina as a boater when you come to town, where it's slips, a fuel dock, a repair operation, or something. Now, because we're such a unique city, it makes sense to couple those triggers with the office buildings. But make no mistake, it's an office building. All right, and it's not a hard maritime space like we witnessed to most of you that came when we did a field visit to the Javen Yacht Yard. Very, very different. And I want to make sure everybody understands what it is that we're talking about, because it's easy to commingle everything and say, well, we don't need any more flexibility for the office space or for the soft maritime parts. So, sticking back to my slides, which Eileen's moving me along. I just, before I move on, I want to touch on something that Eileen did initially, which was the breadth of experience that Eileen put together to form this task force. There is cumulatively over 100 years of experience between Cardi's family, my family. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself. I'm Rod Jabin. I'm the second generation owner operator of the Jabin Yacht Yard. I mean, I was born and raised here in Annapolis. Eileen grabbed people that are real, genuine stakeholders. We have our whole life vested into Annapolis and into the maritime industry. So we care deeply about what steps Annapolis is going to take to continue to foster the maritime industry. So the reason that we say up there that we have internationally recognized yacht designers and 45 years experience working at hard maritime yards like my own, and nationally recognized competitive sailor, not that anybody cares about any of that, but it's important to understand the people that are coming to you and speaking today have the experience of visiting and drilling down into the marinas and the operations in other cities all up and down the East Coast and in the country. And so when we see things that are working well, we bring those techniques back and try and implement those into our own strategy. So when we talk about, a yacht designer, it's like he has been to every port and every city in the world. You talk about myself, I've sailed boats in and out of every port on the East Coast and know what works and what doesn't. And it's just a statement that say, these are the exact same people. If we were to hire an outside firm to do a study on this and make recommendations, we're the people that they're going to come to and ask questions on. We are the most qualified people to make these recommendations. So what we're talking about here is giving more flexibility. And we feel the properties that have the triggers, such as the Templeton property at Severn Avenue and others that have the triggers, are in need of some flexibility to continue to maintain the essential maritime services. And one of the most powerful paragraphs that Cardi had was that we need the non-maritime, the keyboard operators, rent to support the hard maritime tenants that are generally in that $16 to $20 a square foot. That's all they can afford. It's an exceedingly competitive market. And there's just not the margins that there are in non-maritime. And if you go back to the slide that I was talking about when we opened, what we should care about is what's going on with the slips and the fuel docks, the boat lifts, the on-land boat storage, and the fueling stations to preserve our brand and make sure that we're offering the services and support for the maritime industry on a national level, so we continue to be on the national stage. Annapolis is the place to go. And that's what we're enjoying right now. But what we're hearing from experts is that some of the office buildings are in trouble. And we have built great consensus on saying that what we think as a first step is additional flexibility for all the zones. WMM gets another 15%, which brings them up to 45% non-maritime. And again, to be clear, we shouldn't care about that, in my opinion. When you look at those buildings from the water or as you drive by, you shouldn't care if it's a Merrill Lynch or a boat loan company, because you can't tell the difference. As long as that structure is full, then it's going to support the maritime, hard maritime triggers that are in front of it, in an effort to be equitable, because for years all the other zones have been screaming saying, listen, you're giving WMM all this flexibility and we have zero. Right now in WMI, I have zero opportunity to bring in a non-maritime tenant. Zero. That is really putting the handcuffs on us. And certainly, when times are good, it's good. When times are bad, it's bad. And the challenge with this industry that we haven't talked about is its cyclical nature. And we have periods that are great, even now, which is really interesting, because even now, when if you listen to the 6 o'clock news, the boating industry is booming, but we're hearing testimony today that they're still struggling. Cardi has a 5,000 square foot space she cannot rent. Annapolis City Marina has just lost, 30,000 square foot tenant. They're in real trouble. And so even in the best of times, they're in trouble. So I can't imagine how challenging it would be in a down cycle. And trust me, the marine industry is a very cyclical in nature. So we're recommending that relief in flexibility for non-maritime to bolster those office buildings. And on top of that, of course, we need ongoing evaluation, monitoring, and a way to measure what we've done to confirm that it's a successful path. Along with that, we've looked at the hard maritime areas. And again, think back, I'm not the only hard maritime. There's others in the WMI district. But what else would contribute to the success of the hard maritime activities? And you've heard testimony here today that boating is evolved. It's changed significantly. And what is important now is the experience that the visiting boater or visiting yachtsman has when they come to Annapolis or come to your marina. And we want to be able to offer everything from fitness centers to restaurants to other things that make their experience at the marina enjoyable. And that's what's changed. And a lot of people spend their entire weekends at the marina, no reason to leave it. And so one of the things that we've picked up on that is sort of arcane is Annapolis does not allow any restaurants in the WMI. And if they, a restaurant is a big part of what makes marinas successful. Again, for the experience of the visiting yachtsman, as well as all the tenants of the marina and everything else, a restaurant is a very valuable piece of the puzzle. And without the ability to have that, it puts us at a competitive disadvantage. And I'll give you an example of that. Everybody knows where we are on Edgewood Road. Right across the street from Edgewood Road, it's Anne Arundel County. And there's Chesapeake Harbor Marina. I'm sure most of you have heard of that. Anne Arundel County has no such restrictions on restaurants in marinas. They have a very successful restaurant that is part of why the Chesapeake Harbor facility is so successful, because it's a wonderful experience to bring your boat there, be able to walk up for dinner and not have to leave the marina. They have all the accessory structures that we want to see, the complementary uses where the pools, the laundromats, fitness centers, and other activities that make it successful. But a restaurant is key. Without the restaurant, you're forcing them to leave the property, Uber into town, or do something different. And it's a real competitive disadvantage, especially when you overlay not only the fact that Anne Arundel County allows it and it's within 500 yards of your facility, but also all up and down the East Coast and nationally, restaurants are a key component to a successful marina. And I'm not talking about anything more than a restaurant that is moderate in size, that is servicing the community and the boatyard itself. Do we have another slide?
That's it. And thank you so much. Just to conclude, this task force, and we had several people from the task force join us. I think Bob Waldman is in the audience, John Stefanchak and John Martino, who own and run the boatyard at Yacht Haven. Alice Estrada from the Maritime Museum are all here today. They are recommending retain the 4 districts, strong support for that. Continue significant triggers, adding to that fuel docks for the very limited flexibility of 15% non-maritime. And so you know what that winds up in most cases, it's around 3,000 square feet. Support restaurants in WMI only with triggers. Aggressively fund and support. Oh. Well, that's the solution. That way you don't have to, you heard me, I'm loud enough, aren't I? Yeah. Aggressively support the workforce programs as well as the maritime programs, and part of the 15% non-maritime would go toward that fund. Commit to enforcement. ongoing monitoring and measuring, where every year the property owners will submit a report to the planning director, and the planning director will give it to the planning commission so the public will see it, and 5% incentives for water access. And with that said, Will is going to wrap this up.
Thank you. I think you gave me the chance to make this concluding statement, I think I'm here because I'm old. Pete made this reference to being a mid at the time that these zones were enacted. I was on the planning commission, so I guess I really am old. But more seriously, I think I'm here to give a little bit of context and to sum things up. And before I do that, I want to thank the mayor with the encouragement of Alderman Arnett and with the support of all of you. You've taken this matter of great concern to the community seriously and formed this task force, and we hope that the very solid presentation from these very committed and informed individuals has impressed you with the nature of the situation and the need for updating our code in these maritime zones. The thing that I wanted to offer, because I was here when these zones were created as a member of the commission, is that we are following the model that the city utilized at that time so effectively of involving people from all of the affected constituencies from our community and the industry to form the original code for the maritime zones. Some of you know, because you've been in Annapolis even longer than me, you remember the way in which the Civic Association, led at the time by Rob Slauson, someone who those of you who knew him or know him know was intelligent, was committed, was fair-minded, and he helped lead us to this balanced zoning code that we are utilizing today. And these individuals that have given so much time and energy and their experience to this process have actually energized and excited me to be part of the group, because we're at a time when our civic discourse has grown so fractious, so ugly at times. This is a group of people that spent these 6 months working together, respecting one another, hearing the different opinions, and forming a consensus. And that's the word that I want to emphasize: community and consensus, 2 words, I guess, because what we've created in our recommendations is something that is based on all of these subtle adjustments of trying to balance the different interests and the different opinions. And if you, I hope, embrace them, we will move forward with this consensus. If you try to make subtle changes, we expect that, because that's your responsibility, because you are part of the community, you lead the community. But please realize how hard it was to get these dedicated people to come together to embrace this consensus, so that a significant change could destroy that consensus. And I don't know if we will be able to move forward to a successful conclusion in revising and updating as needed this code today. So thank you for your participation and for your hearing us all today. And thank you to the entire group for all the hard work that you've put into this.
Thank you. And one correction, John Martino is with the Annapolis School of Seamanship. Thank you very much.
I think you got to give John Hammond a shout out as well. He's back there.
I did not see John Hammond. How could I miss John Hammond? John Hammond, when I refer to financial expertise, that is code word for John Hammond.
Well, we want to say a big thank you. It's an amazing presentation. Thank you for all the hard work. These things are never easy, but obviously this is born out of the industry, and it's great to have the architect for the original Maritime Zone running it. So Eileen, thank you. And so I had a few hands up. Alderman Pam was first, then Alderman Gay, and I'm sure someone's going to put their hand up to be next.
Thank you.
Alderman Tierney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think with most of us here, you're not exactly talking to the enemy. I know I, for one, agree with the recommendation, and I mean, I love maritime districts and zones. I am a little bit familiar with the Annapolis City Marina situation, and Ms. Templeton, I'm quite sure that as a I guess I should say landlady, I know that you, if you haven't, you may struggle with finding maritime renters, whether it's soft, maritime, or hard. I'm not totally sure I understand everything that would come within soft maritime. I mean, is a seafood restaurant because they sell seafood? I mean, I don't know. But what the heck are you supposed to do if you have a ton of property that you simply can't find a maritime renter for? And I think that there's a very finite number, a limited number of people who are in the maritime industry, either directly or indirectly, to be found here in the Annapolis area. There may be more here than most other places. I don't deny that. But we've got a lot of office space. We've got a lot of, mercantile space here, and I'm not sure there's enough of industry to go around. Why would somebody in the industry, go to an Eastport property of yours or the Annapolis Maritime Museum? Maritime, excuse me, where Carroll's Creek is. And I'm just using those as an example. Why would they go there when they can get rent at half or 2/3 that amount and plenty of room at a place on Ritchie Highway or West Marine in the Hillsmere Shopping Center or that sort of thing? It's a little tough sometimes to get to those properties with traffic at times being, not always, but at times being what it is.
Well, I think one of the things that came out of this that's very important is we do have the opportunity to retain these districts and go forward. So that is very clear, that the districts can be healthy with some tweaking, for want of a better term. With that said, of course, the biggest challenge, which you heard from Cardi, is with the soft maritime, but that doesn't mean that, so what we're trying to do is a conservative approach of tweak it, because the goal of this task force was to keep the districts.
She's right. And what happens when there aren't enough soft maritime tenants?
Well,
Okay,
that's what I'm talking
so
about.
here's what happens.
Okay.
First of all, we all have to be on our game as absolutely much as we possibly can so that they come to me instead of Annapolis City Marina or somewhere else, right? So it encourages us to be as helpful, useful, flexible, et cetera, which is good for the industry. Second of all, when you have a big vacancy, like has happened at Annapolis City Marina, rates go down, right? So rental rates for maritime go down. That's also good, right? And soft maritime will move to the most appealing property because that's now become less expensive. That's also good for maritime. Here's what's tough, right? Now the rates are lower. We can even less afford to maintain the buildings, right? If I can't find a maritime tenant and I come across a non-maritime tenant, I have to let the space go empty if I'm already at my non-maritime percentage. And I have to wait with that empty space until there's a maritime tenant. Because I cannot, and I should not, be able to get a use and occupancy code from the city planning and zoning, right? That's how city planning and zoning makes sure that I don't go beyond my maritime percentage. Every time I get a tenant, I go through and I request a use and occupancy. They ask me my percentage, and if I don't have any more percentage left for non-maritime, that space sits empty.
Do you think most landlords are willing to do what you just said has to be done?
I think we should have laws that make sense, that make this viable, and I think that we should enforce them and people should follow the rules. If the rules make this work, then we should all follow the rules and it will all be fine.
Okay.
And to that point, something that is new in this, and this is something that the property owners very much agreed to, is to have yearly, annually, they will submit who they have, what they have, and this will be public. This will also enable the council and the planning commission to see, is this working? So we've set in ongoing, I call it monitoring and measuring.
Well, I agree. We do, similar things to this in different parts of town. The historic district, you can only, do certain things. In my ward, West Annapolis, the commercial area, regular zoning only permits certain things, and you could get a tenant over there, and, well, what they want to do is not permitted, understandably so in many cases. So I know where you're coming from. It just seems like a very difficult burden at times, or at least it could be. And I'm sympathetic. I'm not sure what the answer is, and maybe we have the answer, and we just have to rethink what we're doing or how we're doing things. But thank you for your presentation. It was very enlightening.
Thank you, Alderman Gay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to be clear, Ms. Templeton, you want more non-maritime space or soft maritime so that they could pay I think you said 33 per square foot as opposed to like the 16 per square foot of a hard, is it referred to as hard maritime? Okay, hard maritime. So would it be, by raising the cap of these soft maritime, well, let me ask it this way, the way I was originally going to ask the question. Would it be easier if there was a flex rate, a more fluid option for maritime versus non-maritime? For example, as Mr. Jobin just stated, the business can be up and down. You might sell 500 boats in a year, and again, I don't know how the maritime process works, but you might sell 500 boats one year, and then you might sell one the other year. And so how do you make up for that? You're proposing through the non-maritime space for soft maritime. But if we increase the soft maritime, then wouldn't it get rid of the hard maritime?
I'm going to ask Rob to answer that, but remember what they're recommending is a small amount of flexibility.
From 11 to 15, correct?
15%, yes. Rob?
Right, and I guess what I wanted to say, just in closing with Alderman Paone, is by increasing the non-maritime space as defined for WMM and others, there really isn't a negative effect on the marine industry, because those spaces that the Templeton Group are referring to that they can't rent because they cannot find a tenant, if they were to rent it to a non-maritime tenant, it will have no effect on the maritime industry, because those guys have decided that space doesn't work for them for a variety of different reasons. It could be because they need to have better access to the water, or they need a bay door to bring their trucks in and out of, or that it's too much space. And we've seen that happen quite frequently, where the industry is breaking into very small entities, and so it's harder and harder to find a tenant that wants a 5,000 square foot space. I don't have any in my hard maritime. In the hard maritime, think of hard maritime as a technician that gets out of his truck with a tool bag on his shoulder to go down and work on your boat. Mm-hmm. Soft maritime, keyboards, working and that kind of stuff. And generally the margins are a little bit higher on the soft maritime, and they're in a position to better afford the rent structure that the Templeton Group has pointed out to us to be able to keep the property viable.
Does soft maritime include retail?
I would say soft maritime could include retail, and it's one of those maritime allowed uses, retail. But the problem is that the retail is being driven out of the spaces because of the West Marines and the Fawcett's, because nobody can compete with that rate structure that they offer, and it's a mile away.
And so one of those, and I'm sorry again, I'm just learning the maritime as we discussing things. So West Marine, that's the one that's over by
The Hillsmere Shopping
Hillsmere, and then Fawcett's.
is just down the road on Bakeridge Avenue.
And so because of their location, they're able to offer.
It's not. It's their size. It's like the
Okay,
Amazon, right?
Yeah,
versus
okay.
a little guy. And so if I have to sell a gallon of bottom paint, I need to get $187 for a gallon of bottom paint. If you go up to West Marine, if you take 5 minutes of time, you can buy that same bottom paint for $99, and that's because they are selling 1 million gallons, and I'm selling 25. So that's driving out the, like, I'll give you an example. I have a small retail shop combined with my little deli, so to speak. And I used to have bottom paint and tape and all kinds of supplies for the boating industry and what you would need. And I couldn't sell anything. And the reason is because it's too challenging with the big box stores so close. And access being as easy as it is. Again, with a cell phone in the car, you can find the lowest price in about 2 minutes and go, oh my God, it's only 2 minutes away. I'm going to jump in a car or jump in an Uber, and I'm going to go up and get my bottom paint and my supplies up there. And it's just another area that is a challenge for our industry, and one of many that we deal with on a daily basis, not to make a big deal out of it, but that's the retail answer.
Yeah. I am totally.
Alderman Scott, I think, had a response as well.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
I combined Alderman Gay with Will Scott, and then you get Alderman Scott.
Old man Scott.
I like Will. You can sit up here with me.
I tried. I think your question and the responses you've gotten are a perfect example of why we're doing what we're doing. Because when the zones were created 35 years ago, we didn't really know how they would play out over such a long span of time. And 35 years is a long time to not look at these zones and change them. And you've heard the kind of changes that have taken place in the industry and why we want to give that added flexibility. So you're really right on point in the kind of question you just asked. And I hope that exchange helps make clear why we're trying to do this and the things we're proposing.
Absolutely, it really does. And I just have 3 last questions. Crap, I just forgot what my. Okay, Mr. Mayor, would you mind just coming back to me? Thanks.
Sure. Alderman Tierney was next.
Thank you. I did look up the definition of consensus. I was just curious on what, Merriam-Webster says. This was my favorite. Group solidarity in sentiment and belief. I thought that was quite appropriate. First, just a couple comments and then just a couple of questions. One thing I learned as Alderwoman in studying the code, and Dr. Nash will appreciate this, is just because you call a zone something doesn't mean it will stay that way. It's like, how profound is that? But anyways, what I have a lot of faith and respect for is the fact that your goals aligned with the same goals of the Maritime Task Force that was put together for the City Dock Action Committee. It was just nice to see similarities that we're all sort of on the same page, and the broader goals of, keeping our branding and keeping the 4 districts, and of course, the jobs. And I also like the fact that because we went 34 years, you're wise to say, let's check this, let's see how we're doing in several years or whatever. My quick questions, for the public or people watching, right? You might need to explain the 15%. Is that a 15% of a building footprint? Is that 15% of a use of a property? Just in
Very
simple
good
terms.
question,
Yeah.
and I apologize. It is 15% of the existing buildings. It does not include residential. So take something like Dan Roche, who's here in the audience. He doesn't have a lot under roof. So in his case, 15%, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 square feet. It is not of the land area. Take Jabin's Yacht Yard. They have a lot of land, but they have a small amount under roof. So that may be, again, 3,000 square feet at the most. Conversely, take the city marina. And as you can see in this image, the city marina is mostly under roof. And so they will probably get 15%, may mean 8,000 or 10,000 square feet. So it's gross floor area, under roof, and very importantly, that exists at the time of adoption. So you can't, in the future, if you build a building, that cannot count toward this.
So the denominator is the same for everyone?
Yes.
Okay. I think Dwan was sort of headed in this direction with the non-maritime. I see two dynamics here that they're a little concerning, and obviously they're a concern to you, is that you need the higher rent and to support the maritime. But at the same time, if it's office space, that's difficult because we know that now that people are working from home, and so who could you give us an example of who are these people who would be these non-maritime businesses?
So you have two different situations, and they're both right up here. On the one hand, you have the city marina. So the city marina is really the odd man out because they are an office building. They were built a couple of years or so before I got here, and it had been working boat yards, and the city marina was one of the triggers for looking at all the maritime districts in the mid-'80s because it really replaced boat yards with an office building. So their tenants, Wendy was one of their tenants for the last several years. They would be able for maritime to get blue technology, it would be because it's office space. I'll let Cardi and Rod talk to their tenants.
I think her question was non-maritime. She wanted to know who you're going to attract non-maritime, an example, which could be,
to pay that rent.
To have a water,
Actually, it's we're allowed two types of non-maritime tenants right now: professional office and non-maritime retail.
Right. So professional.
And if you are listed somewhere and you use an office, but you are listed in the code, I can't have you because you are listed in the code somewhere else and you are not listed with me. So we can't, for example, have Reiki studios or psychotherapists or doctors' offices. Okay? The good news here, and I think the real wisdom back in the 80s when this went into place, was that the non-maritime uses we can have now are entirely compatible with the maritime uses, right? So we cannot have apartment buildings that would then have people who didn't like the smell of a boatyard, right? So our non-maritime is compatible with, happy to be beside, doesn't push out maritime.
Right. And personal opinion, we don't want our boatyards to look like a strip mall on Route 2 with a dental office.
Exactly.
I don't want to see Edgewood Dentistry or whatever.
So it is professional office and non-maritime retail.
No offense to Route 2.
Bless our code, there's lots of things that we can't have.
But it is a challenge to find those tenants to get that rent.
There are many non-maritime tenants, many more than there are maritime.
Okay.
Many more. Some of them can pay a lot of money.
Okay. And they're near the water. It's a great location. One last one was lenders penalize maritime. Why is that so?
Well, I didn't hear the question.
Lenders penalize. That's unfortunate.
So here's the thing. It turns out that when a bank wants to lend to you, they want to figure out how risky you are.
Okay.
Right? When they look at you and say, wait a minute, almost all of your tenants have to be maritime, or if you're Rod, they all have to be maritime, they sort of say, what is maritime? What counts? So if you had a space that went vacant, how quickly could you refill it? And because we all know that those aren't easy answers, some of us spend a career figuring it out, right? They say, okay, fine, you look like you know what you're doing, and you are waterfront, and I know that's good, but I'm only gonna lend you about 60 or 65% of your property value, whereas in the case of a non-maritime but traditional commercial, they may lend 75.
Okay.
Also, they charge about 0.25% higher in interest rate, in my experience.
Okay.
0.15 or 0.25% higher. So our interest rates are higher, and the amount we can borrow relative to the property value is lower, because they really want to make sure they don't end up running my business.
Right. They don't want you to lose it.
So that's why they penalize
I'm going to state one more question, sorry. I should know the answer to this because of my background, but could you give us an idea of a comparable 4,000 square foot restaurant? You know, is it a Galway Bay? Is it a,
Yeah, so
I mean, how big?
2,000 square feet was the original boatyard. And now the expanded boatyard is, I think, just under 4. I got these numbers from Dick Franio.
Boatyard Bar and Grill?
Yes, Boatyard Bar and Grill.
That's about 4,000 square
Yeah,
feet. Okay.
right around there.
Yeah.
If you think about, if you've ever been in the yacht club, one
Yes,
of
I
those
was.
floors in the yacht club is more than 4,000. I think they're more like 5,000.
Yeah.
So does that give you some sense?
Yeah.
The chart house,
Yeah. That's big.
the chart house is
Yeah,
8,500.
Yeah, just to give everyone an idea of what your limit is. Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you all, really. It's great.
Thank you, Alderman Annette. And then, okay, Alderman Savage, then
Thank you, Mr.
Alderman
Mayor.
Annette, and then Alderman Shannon.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to thank everybody for your time and effort in this, and to Alderman Arnett for having this idea, because it's exactly what we wanted to do, is to get a lot of the experts and people who have the experience, firsthand experience in this zone, the maritime zone, and develop recommendations for us. So thank you for all of that. And for me, for Ward 7, obviously the WMI is very important to us. That's our only maritime zoning. But we did manage to have a community meeting where I spoke to some of my constituents about this virtually. And they're also very committed to protecting that zone, the mission of the maritime zone. And they were also open to the 15% trigger, or the 15% for non-maritime for restaurant use. So, because I think the argument's been made that successfully, I think that can help to enhance and make sure we have a continuing maritime zone, especially for the WMI. That's really what I'm focusing on primarily, but I'm going to look at everything. So overall, I'm very happy with the work that you've all put forward. And I think, Mr. Scott, you're absolutely right on in terms of the building consensus point. I think that's exactly what we wanted to see come out of this, and I'm glad to see it was successful. So, and also a lot of kudos to Ms. Fogarty for all of your work on this. And so, again, while overall I do think this is very good, I'd still like to dig into the details. The presentation was, there's a lot packed in there.
Yeah.
And I'd like to take some time to really digest it. Maybe we can go over in a committee meeting, go over this in more detail when it comes down to either drafting legislation or what have you. But in any case, just as one example, I wanted to get some more information about the triggers in terms of, I can understand the trigger for the fuel dock and the importance that represents. Hopefully at some point they will be charging docks instead of fueling docks.
Yeah.
But I know that's going a bit slower for the maritime industry than it is for automobile. But in any case, I kind of wanted to get some more rationale on some of the other triggers and how, because I know the basis is that these represent, I believe, if I understand you correctly, they represent capacities that are really, that you see as important to making sure we have for a continuing and thriving maritime industry. And so can you explain some of the others?
Sure.
I didn't quite catch them all as we were going through the
Yeah,
presentation.
because I went through them quickly. So the idea of a 30-ton lift, I think we've got a picture of one early on here. The idea is that it's sizable, that the interest was, what size is that, Rod, do you think?
It's a, no, keep going back, Eileen, or whatever, but I'm happy to, there it is.
Is that it? That's a 30-ton lift. And the thought process is that it's a large enough lift. It's not somebody just, pulling out a couple of small sailboats, that it's a serious, you're involved in a serious boatyard with doing real boatyard work. So that was where the size came. 30,000 or 20,000 square foot working yard. I'm thinking in Eastport, I think Dan Roche, your yard is 20, isn't it? So if you think about the backside of Eastport and the yard that used to be Jabin's yard, the one it's next to the Maritime Museum, that's about a 20,000 square foot yard. So the idea of 20,000, and again, this was done years ago when the task force went up to Newport, and we went all over the all over the New England coast, looking at what size yard you really need to have to bring all of this together. And that it was decided that to have all of the repairs and the fabrication, everything else, 20,000 was a rational size. Let me just ask John Stefanchuk. John, how big is yours?
You're thinking of John here? You're thinking of John Moore?
I'm putting you now with John, I'm thinking of John Norton's yard. How big do you think Norton's yard is? 20?
Well, yeah.
Norton's yard is 20. So if, John has just moved from the publishing business to the boatyard business. And that's what I said in the beginning, as I moved the sailing school to the boatyard business as well. But the idea was that it would be sizable enough that it would be really meaningful to the industry. 25,000 square feet of on-land boat storage is a large amount of boat storage. Templeton's site has that, and they use that site to store the boats for John Norton's boatyard at Yacht Haven. And it's this, if you go down to the chart house, about halfway down the block, on your right is a large lot with boats on it. That's 25,000 square feet, so that it's a significant size. Fueling stations is self-evident. Boat clubs and seafood processing have been in this since the beginning. We have added definitions to boat clubs to make sure that to reflect the substantial boat clubs that exist. There are several boat clubs, and we've added definitions of a few hundred members and a couple hundred boats and boats with keels. So those and seafood processing, we didn't take out. Just theoretically, someone could want to do seafood processing, but it was originally in there for McNasby's. So these are very substantial triggers. These are not small triggers.
Do you want to finish up, Alderman Gay? Then Alderman Shannon, Alderman Shannon wanted to go before you, Alderman Arnett, right?
Thank you. Very quick. Just a couple quick questions. The 25,000 square feet across from Bread and Butter, when you look in with the all wood building, that's 25,000 square feet where those boats are housed?
Open yard.
Yeah.
In between where the Maritime Antique Store is. In between where the Maritime Antique Store is and the Bread and Butter, there's that large lot on the right.
On the backside, yeah.
Right.
Okay,
where they store the boat masts and the boats are stored there.
Thinking that's 25,000 square feet on the side, which is crazy because even to the next point in the square feet, I think what Ellie mentioned briefly, 2,000 to 4,000 square feet, it surprises you when you actually see, okay, this is 2,000 square feet. It's kind of small, when we had an opportunity to come out to your deli, which was great to see it up close and personal. And so I appreciate you inviting us there. I obviously am in support of an increase to 4,000 square feet just because I think it would be helpful to your business, as you mentioned, the non-maritime use. I have a couple of questions about that, though, in regards to the non-maritime use and the square footage. In the beginning, it was mentioned that the task force was not interested in non-maritime use of residential or hotels, even though I think it was noted either in the presentation or by a comment that they bring in the most revenue as it relates to property tax and things like that. So would you consider at some point, and I'm just, again, thinking out of the head here, something like what is it called, Ellie? What you used to own? Yeah, like something like that where the person can stay and on the lot. I know you mentioned the hotel and residential, so I just was trying to get a better understanding.
I'm
of that.
going to turn this to Will, but the reason there's strong opposition against it is, in zoning, we have these terms, highest and best use, which means what use brings the most money. Hotel, residential are what you would call not best, but highest use. And they, because of their value, drive out and are not compatible with working yards. If you think about those condominiums where Walter Cronkite used to live, what is the name of those condominiums, Ross? The one.
Tecumseh?
No, I think it's 107 facing.
Tecumseh.
It's facing the Naval Academy. There are about 5 or 6 condos. Those, this goes back a million years, but we would always get complaints. And even now, Sally and Eric get complaints from people in Severn 100 because residents, they don't want noise, they don't want fumes, they're not compatible.
To that point, though, and again, we're just having a conversation, aren't they also complaining that they don't want to hear the sounds of a restaurant across the water? So we're really kind of stuck either way.
But this is one of the reasons, if you think about a maritime use, it's an industrial use. And so one of the reasons they have an slightly easier time with it on Back Creek, they have huge parcels and they don't have any residents immediately on top of them. So residential is not something you would put in a maritime. And hotel, simply because everybody wants a waterfront hotel, it drives the land values up and drives the use out. Will?
This is a little bit of the historical context that I think I'm here to provide when... Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. My wife tells me I talk loudly, so I've gotten used to that. But anyway, yeah, it's on. It's green. Alderman Gay, when the zones were created, one of the triggers that caused them to be considered and created was the proposal to put a hotel on the Eastport side of the bridge. And the concerns that were raised very intensely were that starts to wall off the water. The Tecumseh was already there. And people, residents all throughout the city that are adjoining these zones are concerned as much about that walling off visually, okay? But also, we're trying to focus on creating more water access. Every time you put something like that there, you've closed off more water access because the residents that move in tend to not only want to not have the noise and fumes, but as you well know, they don't want people wandering around on their property, So, and since Alderman Schandelmeyer, my alderman, has just arrived, I want to throw in one other thing. Just because Ward 5 is so far removed from these zones, think of how many of your new constituents are people who boat, people who want to get more access to the water. This current revisiting of the zone is even more, I think, than the original creation, trying to address the concerns of all Annapolitans. And we hope that we've come up with a proposal to all of you that will facilitate all Annapolitans for being part of our maritime tradition and contemporary enjoyment and use of the water.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that, the history of that. And so just in line with that, oh, I'm sorry, Cardi.
May I also say, back to the comment on consensus. When we all started this, some of us said, this happens once every 34 years. Oh my goodness, we've really got to make sure we solve this problem for the next 34 years because we don't do this very often, right? But where we ended up was we're going to trust and have faith that this is something that we can collectively look at every 2 or 3 or 4 years. And we're going to make a recommendation for a change that we think will solve some of this. We don't think that this is going to solve this for the next 34 years. But we don't want to recommend something that we think could, because what if we get it wrong? And so 15%, I think we collectively feel like that is the least amount that will start to solve some of these problems. And we don't want to suggest more at this point, because what if we end up hurting Maritime? So we're being careful in these recommendations with a hope that this will be carefully monitored, actually adhered to, right? And that the city council will be open to fine tuning if that's what needs to be happen. But we want to make sure we don't hurt Maritime. We don't want to hurt Maritime, but we also can't afford collectively to have the buildings not be viable. And that's where we are with office. They're not viable. But let's not make more change than we're sure we need.
Okay. I have two last ones. You mentioned we were talking about the restaurants and how it creates space to water access. And to me, is it water access when you're at a restaurant and you bottle water? I'm looking at it, I'm not enjoying it. And so my next question is, what can maybe WME, WMI, what can these industries do to help promote water access? And I'll just quickly show an example and something that I used, I think the last time. When I was just recently traveling and they had, their marine places or whatever, you could walk over there, you give them $200, your ID, do a 30-minute course and rent a jet ski or a small boat, creating revenue, also providing opportunity for the water that other people would just necessarily wouldn't have. So where do we stand expanding opportunities to the water there? Because otherwise, the only thing I can do is go downtown, pay $45 and ride the Queen Harbor around, So what can we do to just promote more access to the water?
But I think what's important to understand is, I just like to touch on the restaurant comment. I do believe that offering the community access to a restaurant on a waterfront property, like whether it's a WMI, WMM, or WME, greatly contributes to the accessibility of the water, because they get to look out, they get to dream about being out on the water, they get to see people in action, and they may take the next step, which is 2 doors over, there's a charter office so that you can book a charter on a jet ski or a paddleboard or a sailboat or a powerboat. So those opportunities are absolutely available to those people, and by giving them the opportunity to walk down and enjoy the atmosphere of the water while enjoying a meal and a beverage, I think that really enhances that community access. Some don't want to get any closer, right? Then I'm going to stay right on land and look out. It's beautiful. There is a atmosphere about a waterfront dining experience that can't be replicated. It does give them a pathway forward, because if they inquire or ask, there are a lot of opportunities available to get out on the water.
So while we're still in the recreation, I just have a couple of questions. Probably you can wrap it into. Are the charter options currently affordable? If not, what can we do to promote affordability? And so, that's in the recreation question.
Well, the affordability thing is a question. You have to define affordability. There are options that start with paddle boards that are next to free. I mean, I think it's $20 for an hour. And then it goes all the way up to chartering a 50-foot sailboat that is $3,000 for the weekend. So there's everything from paddleboards to high-end cruising boats available to somebody that wants to experience an opportunity on the water. It doesn't necessarily have to cost a fortune. And some of the reason that we define them as car top boats, whether it be a kayak or a stand-up paddleboard or whatever, because you can put it on top of your car. You can go to a waterfront access site like the Ellen Moyer Park at Capitol SUP or Truxton Park or any of the other street end sites, launch your kayak, go in the water, and some of the most precious enjoyment of the water is on a kayak or a stand-up paddleboard. That's why we've seen an explosion of that sport. It actually occupies, what, Susan, 60% of the boating registered boats or whatever is the car top stuff. It's very, very popular. So it doesn't have to cost a fortune. That's you get a taste of that, and then you kind of want a little bit more, and that's where you start to go into a little bit bigger boat and a little bit bigger boat and a little bit bigger boat. And the cost, yes, you know, there are costs associated with it, but that's all relative to.
Yeah.
I'd like Mike to talk about the whole concept behind the water access incentives.
Yeah, and that's it's a really good question, Alderman Gay, because it addresses what really came about in this group when we were talking about what ways can we incentivize the property owners in the maritime zones to create spaces that the people of the city and visitors can really use. Not you have to come down and plunk down your Amex Gold Card on a 2-week charter to go sail over to St. Michael's and come back. It's about creating the vibrancy of lots of different uses, a kayak rental business, or a dedicated place where you can go and launch yourself, or someplace where you might be able to dip a line in the water without having to, you know, go out on an offshore fishing trip out of Ocean City. So those are the opportunities that I think that we've talked about, and the incentives. I think we're still probably in the process of crafting them correctly and how they're monitored. Right, but it creates a way for everybody to be able to get access to the water, and I think that's what we're going at. Gavin and I have had these discussions in the past because my business is one that takes people out on the water, and it's really nice to see what's happening right now in Spa Creek and Back Creek, which is this variety of uses. You get out on the water and you see people going fishing, you see people paddleboarding, you see paddleboard yoga classes set up on the creeks, and it's really different than just a bunch of speedboats or sailboats crossing through the bridge every half an hour. There really is a vibrancy to the harbor right now, and that's, you know, we want to see more of that.
This is my last question, because I'm trying to be cognizant of my colleagues and
Alderman Gay, I just want Eric to also address what he has started as a result of this effort.
I would just quickly say, let you keep what you're going with that. You know, obviously, equitable access to the waterfront is a signature part of our comprehensive plan, and this task force was able to address that. I think it's not the full picture. You know, the full picture is what Wendy O'Sullivan spoke to in her part earlier about a citywide process that looks at waterfront access. But the maritime zones have a huge opportunity to contribute to that, and you know, as a comprehensive planner, I'm thinking about all of the ways in which we can create those opportunities. It's not just the city acting, but it's our partners in, you know, property owners, it's nonprofits, it's National Park Service, and, you know, it's all of these stakeholders involved. So,
thank you for that. And my last question. Yeah, because it's a very interesting topic, and you guys are right when you talk about the experience that you have, 100+ years, a collective experience, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to communicate with you about this. Equity. I mentioned it a couple of times in the last meeting, and I think this also goes hand in hand with access. If this is something that goes well, and we are committed to this investment into, you know, the water access and water business, and what does it look like to invest in or bring those opportunities to areas? For example, I'm just using Hawkins Cove for example. You see this area that the city is trying to invest in and build up. What does it look like for, and I'm just using you two because you're here and I know you own water businesses, Cardi or Mr. Jobin, what does it look like for you to then invest in an area like that and bring, water activities there so people don't have to go to, down the street to get, they can, launch from here? Or how does that work in regards to these, successful industry investing into communities that necessarily just don't have that access, but if they could, contribute to the revenue that you want to build?
Mike, I think, can talk to that in terms of how it's structured incentives.
Incentives, that's the
Yeah,
correct,
so-
exact right word, yeah.
Right. So the discussions have led us to a place where we understood that there was a base level of flexibility that the property owners were going to need to be viable long-term, right? And there was push and pull between the industry and the property owners about what the right number was, and that was the 15%. So if you have just make it simple, 1,000 square feet, and you want to rent 150 square feet to somebody non-maritime, that gives you flexibility, and you can rent that. But how do we incent them then to provide something that the community can use? How do we incent them to spend money or time or resources at a place like Hawkins Cove, which is something that could really create a game changer for that area of the city, right? That access to the water is going to require a large amount of investment. So how do we dovetail that with the flexibility that the task force is trying to get, or the task force members are trying to get for the maritime property owners? And that's one of the things that we've come up with. Can you get, say, an extra 5%, bringing you up to 20% total non-maritime by providing something that the community really needs?
Or even a property tax credit. I think that anytime you as an independent business owner are willing to take dollars that you've worked hard to make and invest those dollars into vulnerable communities, really, and expand their horizon. As you were saying, talking about, sitting on the water and dreaming. It's one thing to dream. I can dream all day. I dream all the time, but it's another thing to actually do it and to actually, physically be involved and to see that out of my back window or something like that. And so I think that's what we need. And I think that would, go a long, long way in this. And so I'm so grateful for you guys. If you could also just send me a link, Eileen, to some of these, charting yeah, so I can just have a general idea of what, that'd be helpful too. Thank you guys so much.
So we've got less than 20 minutes left, and so I'm just letting you all know that Alderman Schandelmeyer and then Alderman Finlayson, and I think Ross wants to wrap us up. Is that right?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm going to kind of echo a lot of questions my colleague Alderman Gay said and talk about housing and restaurant space because it's kind of my thing. So first off, I do want to push back slightly on just the notion that is being made on housing is not compatible with the maritime zoning because of noise, etc. I think that's something that the market can kind of sort out. If you are knowing that you are moving into a maritime zone, there is going to be noise, smells, etc. that might make an impact on your decision to buy a house there. And so if we just go no housing whatsoever, we're continuing a very dangerous trend in this city that has made us one of the least affordable places in the country for someone to buy or rent. So I would ask you guys to reconsider that strongly. I do think, again, people's decisions of living next to a boatyard can factor into that.
Alderman, there are two issues. One is the incompatibility, but the other issue is the land values. Housing on the waterfront drives up the land values, and as such, in all the studies and all the experiences we have had, it drives out the maritime. So that was the other issue.
Wouldn't that be a good way to subsidize, though, those maritime buildings then, or those maritime industries, since we have the cap at 15 or 30 or 50%?
Housing is probably the least desirable use because it privatizes, it creates conflicts, and you can look at waterfront housing is millions of dollars. So it's, if you could put waterfront housing that was, $200,000, but waterfront housing, and just think about Eastport, is just millions of dollars. And so it just drives up the value of the land so that the maritime uses can't sustain it.
And I think putting in a housing, even in an expensive area, though, increases the stock and lets prices down here because it's very simple to supply and demand. If we artificially limit the supply, demand is going to always be high and prices are going to be high. If we even increase that supply, though, we start trying to match that, and it ends up kind of cascading down for impact fees. Plus, with, again, putting next to a working boatyard, that may lower the cost down from $1 million because, again, the smells, etc. Now I'm going to move on to restaurant space. So I do apologize. I had another meeting right before this. Could you explain to me the rationale between for why WME was stuck with 2,000 square feet for restaurant space instead of 4,000 like the other zoning districts?
I can speak to it, and then I'm going to ask Rod to speak to it as well. The WME is currently allowed 2,000 square feet for a restaurant, and it is what's called a special exception. And WMI is not allowed 1,000 square feet. So when there was strong agreement that restaurants should be added, a lot of people in the industry and certainly the property owners were favorable toward adding that option only with a trigger, but to WME as well, because it was an issue, a feeling of equity. With that said, the residents, and this was not just residents in Eastport, it was Eastport as well as some of the residents in Ward 1, felt that there were plenty of restaurants in Eastport. They did not want to see more restaurants, and they did not necessarily want to see them on the water. Rod, do you want to add anything, or anyone?
Yeah, I think Eileen painted the picture pretty well. It's not that we didn't want to make it equitable across all the zones, but when we ran into that brick wall with the Civic Association, again, we've reached out to so many different areas, and the community being one of them spoke very loudly. And in all transparency, we didn't think that it was a smart move politically because we didn't think we'd win that. And there would be so much pushback from the community that the council wouldn't support it. So that's why we said we don't have consensus. We couldn't bring an alignment with the community. But if you ask me offline what I think, I'm all for it. I mean, we have sites that would absolutely be very successful, but because there's not community support, we backed away from it.
I'd just like to add that this is part of what I've been consistently trying to refer to. This is a consensus building process, and just as Rod explained, when we evaluated all of the different input from different constituencies, we had to come to a place that we thought we all could get together and recommend as a consensus report to all of you. So he said it very well, and I think that's important to keep in mind when you decide what you want to go forward with.
I understand. People loudly screaming, "Not in my backyard," tends to handicap and weaken a lot of cities.
But also, I mean, if we just bring, to bear the struggle that went on with the development of South Annapolis Shopping Center with Ward 1, we felt that was not a winning strategy for us. So that's all. And I mean, it was just a big roadblock in front of us that we couldn't get alignment.
Yeah, $1 million homes. Cool. Thanks, guys.
I'm going to hand it to Alderman Arnett. If I have to go to a 5, so I might put it over to... Oh, sorry, Sheila. I apologize.
I'm on the end. He forgets me all the time. I need a bell.
I might be handing it to Ellie at 5 because I got to run to a 5. So.
Thank you. My questions have really been answered, but I want to thank you all. You are our experts, and you come from very diverse places, but you came to a consensus, and that's important to us. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for including the job training opportunities that you shared. Thank you for your seriousness about getting access to the water and your incentives. That's big. So I say, give us a copy of the report so that we can use it as our foundation. Because I learned an awful lot sitting here this time. And thank you, Rod, for the tour of the your facility and helping us to see something we normally would not have seen. So I just want to say thank you all for coming together to give us this report, which will be the foundation of future legislation. I know it took 35 years in the making, and this will probably last for another 34 years. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Going to hand it Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
But if you get it under 10, I'm
I actually hope to be very quick. So first of all, I want to once again extend my thanks. Eileen, how many people in total were on the task force?
The people that participated were 34, and you see several of them in here. And it was equally balanced. The task force itself, the actual members was smaller, but everyone had equal access, so we did not distinguish. And if there was an equal number of residents, property owners, and industry, and also, as you see with Alice and Wendy, and we had the Severn River Association, we had, public interest groups as well.
So it seemed like it was more every time I attended, and I tried to attend as many of the meetings as I could. It felt like a cast of thousands, and that's a good thing, and I thank you for that, and I thank you for marshaling all of this and pulling it together. So my concluding question, which is not now, is next steps. But as we move to the next phase of this, I'm sure all of us, I know I am, are getting bombarded with a lot of questions, which I hope there'll be a lot of supporting answers in the report. But questions like, how are the residents who are already here going to benefit from any of these changes? And we've heard that quite a bit. The question that was just spoken to, even if the citizens in the WME said they didn't want restaurants, the people who own the properties that do want restaurants are going to come back and make that case. And I'm really going to be interested in seeing how we work that out legislatively. How do we justify restaurants everywhere but not in one particular zone? And I think there's ways to deal with that. I think there are density issues, and maybe it's not the same across all of the WME, but it is going to be a question. A question I've heard is, how do we recruit and retain maritime businesses when we're reducing the amount of space available in maritime, albeit 15%? I think that is one that I've heard. I heard a very micro level code change here, which is allowing temporary boat cover things in the wintertime. I mean, that's going to be an interesting thing to add to the code. Just carrying out with a couple of others, I think that we still really need to have, and you may already have it, a specific definition of what is maritime and thus what is not, and then what is not maritime that is compatible or allowable in the maritime zones. Certainly it's not condominiums or hotels, so I think that there's really three categories: maritime, I would call it compatible maritime, and not maritime, not now, not ever, kind of thing. So that speaks to it. And then the last big one that I really am getting is there are still groups, still owners and businesses that are bringing up the fairness issue. An example of that is the former Moeller Marine, which does not have a 20-ton or 30-ton boat lift, but does provide hard maritime services, primary maritime, industry maritime. And so I think when we get into the actual code writing we may need to think about every one of the businesses in the maritime area and how they're differentially impacted or not impacted by whatever it is we come out with. So with that set of questions that I'm already feeling, and I know we'll continue to feel, I wanted to go back to what are the next steps? Sheila mentioned a report. Is there going to be a report?
The next step will be legislation, which will come with a staff report from the planning department, and then that will be followed by when we go into hearing with the planning commission, there will be a report from the task force.
Okay, so and then the last part is writing code is actually the easy part. Enforcing the code is what is not done. And I don't see how we're offering any expectation that that's going to happen with new code. So I'm going to be very much looking at the enforcement aspects of any legislation. We know that even in maritime zones where it's 100%, there are non-maritime businesses there now. And, sometimes we just turn a blind eye to it. But I think that the community, particularly communities that feel like they're adversely impacted, are going to really look at how we're enforcing any code change.
And I think a provision that this group has recommended and will be in the code itself that requires the owners every year to submit exactly who they have, how much, that puts the onus on the owners, makes it a much more manageable task for the department. And since it is going to be a public document, if there's anything that looks out of order, it will be something that'll be public information.
A last gratuitous comment, and you did it well today, but I don't think it's well understood, is 15% non-maritime is 15% of the maritime building, not the maritime lot. And I think that makes a huge, getting that across to constituents is going to make a huge difference. I think, Rod, you gave a great example of, there are some big buildings, but there's a lot of places that don't have much building space at all. I also think that the restaurant issue is going to need more clarification. The Boatyard is a big restaurant, and I think that people envision same kind of traffic in the maritime, in the WMI, if a restaurant is the size of the Boatyard, is considerable. Rod, when we met with you, you were very, first of all, again, thank you for having us, but explaining your intent is primarily, doesn't mean exclusively, but primarily to satisfy the people who work at your yard and have boats at your yard. And if Rob comes in for a burger or a brew, that's fine, but that's not really the primary purpose. So thank you, again, thank you, everyone.
And Alderman Tierney wanted
Yeah.
to say one last thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to address, I think it was Brooks and Dewan, as far as introducing residential or a larger restaurant or that. We have a lessons learned in City Dock. It was a maritime zone. And there is a tipping point, if you will, where you lose it. And we saw that gradually happen at City Dock, where Fawcett's, a maritime business, couldn't afford to be there anymore. They were bookended by hotels and what have you. So it isn't a question, at least from my perspective with my residents' concern about restaurants, it's just that fear that it will then, the tipping point will be reached and you just have the highest and best use, which is hotels and restaurants. Is that pretty simple? Simple concept that was clearly demonstrated at the City Dock.
Thank you. Well, we'd all love to get an electronic copy of this. Want to thank you, and I just want to reiterate, this is what we're doing to keep the buildings the shapes that they are, right? To keep the form that we love, the scale and fabric of this city is so much connected to the waterfront and to the maritime uses. So I want to thank you for this, and we're looking forward to the next meeting. And with that, it's 5 o'clock, so we're going to let you go. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.